Hello everybody, my name is Zeke, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of July. So just talking about this month, like in general, it was definitely a weird month because looking back now, I kind of feel like it was not a good month for my reading, especially just looking at ratings and what I kind of thought of each book after it. Not a lot really stuck with me. And I also gave two stars this month, which is very rare for me. Usually it's like one a month maximum, because 2 stars for me really just means I didn't like a book. And I tend to like most of the things I read. However, like while I was in the midst of reading this month, I wasn't really thinking about like how like poorly it was going. So I guess in a way it wasn't too bad because I wasn't really like feeling like a reading slump coming on or anything like that. So even though like looking back, it doesn't seem like a great month, it still was okay, and it didn't really impact like my wanting to read in any way, which I think is definitely a good thing, because it's one thing to not be enjoying everything you read and another to have the things you're reading make you not want to read. So I'm glad that didn't happen to me, but I did end up reading a lot this month. I read 9 books, very happy about that, and one of them was very, very long, and so I feel like it was really good to just have a lot of time to read, get through a lot of books, and get through a lot of books that I had on my TBR and stuff I had been wanting to read for a while. Even if it didn't necessarily go perfectly, I still have a lot to talk about, so I will start getting into that. So the first book I read this month was Trust by Hernan Diaz. This won the Pulitzer Prize last year, very critically acclaimed, and I ended up enjoying it a lot. This was definitely a good start to the month. This is a very weird book. The basic plot outline is pretty simple. We're told the story of this husband and wife who have risen to incredible wealth through manipulation of the economy and the world around him. The husband is technically the main character. And what makes this book so unique is the structure in which it's told, the way we get through the story. This book is split into 4 parts. They're each told differently. They're each a different style of writing, and they're each from different perspectives. And it's just a very interesting way to build up the story. And also, it's not just a gimmick, because all of these parts kind of relate to what the actual meaning of the book is. And I don't want to say too much about it because it'll kind of spoil it and ruin what makes this book good, because I think the plot itself is nothing really special, but it really is the way that the structure is used to tell this story that really makes it good. And so I definitely would recommend this if you're looking for something a little different, and definitely really wowed me just with being unexpected. I didn't really know a lot going into this book, and just it can be confusing at times, but it was just really impressive to read, and so I gave this 4 stars. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is the longest book I read this month, and probably the longest book I've read this year even. That's Swan Song by Robert McCammon. This is a book I've been wanting to read for a few months. It's absolutely ginormous, as you can see, and this book, we basically follow this world-ending event, and it spans a lot of territory. I mean, it's like a 900-page book. We get lots of different perspectives, we get lots of different kind of storylines that eventually intersect, and it was a lot, and I really did end up actually enjoying it while I was reading it, but kind of getting through the book, looking back, for the amount of pages it was, not enough happened in my opinion, and it didn't really wow me. It's definitely very impressive because of how long it is and how everything eventually comes together, but it felt kind of expected, run-of-the-mill post-apocalyptic fiction. It didn't really seem very different to me, especially considering all the praise it gets, and it was definitely good, but I wouldn't say it was great for me, at least, and I definitely don't think it was worth all the time I spent reading it, even though I'm glad I kind of read it because it is kind of a classic of the genre, I guess you could say. I don't really think it was worth it, unfortunately, even though I still enjoyed it. It's hard for me to talk about this book because I can't say that I didn't enjoy reading it and I wasn't kind of interested in the story as it was happening, but it just really didn't stick with me. And to me, that's why I gave this 3 stars, because to me, a 3-star book is something, it can be something I still enjoyed, but if it's something that isn't going to stick with me, or something that I had a lot of issues with looking back on it even, then I don't really think it's fair to give it 4 or 5 stars. Just as I said, the plot was good, but for a 900-page book, I really just don't think enough was going on. And also, I'm not really sure how I feel about the ending, but I didn't put too much stake in that, and I didn't like hate the ending or anything, and I thought it was okay. So definitely not as good as I wanted it to be, but it's still okay. Okay, next, now we get into some territory where I literally have nothing to say about this book. That's Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett. This book is very divisive. Some people love it, some people hate it. Somehow going in, I did not know that this was stream of consciousness, and that was definitely a shock. And it is the whole book. It is kind of very hard to get through, and I honestly, I could not tell you what this book was about. We have like these chapters, but I think some of them were kind of like written before the book and written separately and then linked together, and it's a lot of just rambling on and on about things, and there's not really like a plot per se. It's kind of just like reflections of this woman on her life or like things that are going on. And I can't say, I just it did not connect with me at all. I feel like I just didn't understand it. That's why I actually didn't rate this book, because I feel like it wouldn't be fair, especially because I didn't really know what I was getting into, and if I had known it was like stream of consciousness, I probably wouldn't have picked it up to begin with. But I did end up finishing it, and I think, you know, there were parts that were interesting, there were parts I enjoyed, but I actually cannot remember a single thing from this book, except for like the very beginning. They talked about like this one specific moment, and just like rambled on and on about it, that I remember very well, because I was like, oh, I really should not be reading this book, but I did it anyways. Gotta learn to just put books down when I don't want to continue reading them, but I did not do that this time, and I probably should have. So I didn't rate this book, could not tell you a single thing about it, but if you want like literary stream of consciousness, I'm sure that this will work for you. I just don't think a lot of people really enjoy that, and I get it, because it's a lot, and I know like a lot of people really do love this book because of that, and it's unique, and the writing is very beautiful, I'll give it that, but it just, for me, was not it and didn't really connect. So definitely was not really expected, but at the same time, this was a book I'd only really heard about recently, and so I wasn't like too invested in it being incredible and changing my life. So it wasn't like severely disappointing, and I just decided not to rate it and kind of pretend that never happened, because that's the best course of action for me. And the next book was an unsurprising 2 stars, and that was Age of War by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the 3rd book in the Legends of the First Empire trilogy, and this is the last book I'll be reading in that trilogy, because I very much did not like the 2nd book, and I did enjoy the 1st book, but it was just okay, and kind of the reason I kept reading from there was because I expected it to get a lot better, and I thought it had a lot of promise, and I feel like the 2nd book just squashed that, and I just wanted to finish the 3rd book, because after the 3rd book is kind of like a stopping point in the series if you want to. So this trilogy, we're following the general story of this conflict between men and Frey are like elf characters, and in this book we finally get to like this big confrontation, this big war. It is one battle for basically the whole book, and it wasn't even that incredible. For me, I don't connect to like any of the characters in this series, and I just feel like everything's so drawn out and barely anything actually happens in this whole trilogy. I really think that there's like stuff going on in the 1st book that seems to be setting up a lot of things happening in the future, and then the rest of the other 2 books is literally just like 3 events that happen in the course of a total of like 800 pages, and it's really like, what did I just read? Why did I just spend time on that? So I gave this 2 stars. I don't have a lot more to say about it, just because I wasn't really expecting to like it. I just wanted to get to a point where I could put the series down and be like, okay, I feel like it's definitely not for me. It wasn't just a fluke. I didn't want to just write it off because of the 2nd book if the 3rd book ended up being really good, but I really just did not enjoy the 3rd book that much. It wasn't like terrible. I think the 2nd book was a lot worse, but because I just don't connect to the characters like at all, and I just thought the plot was kind of run-of-the-mill and not very engaging. 2 stars for me. Did not really enjoy reading it, and am glad that it's over. Okay, next we have Sirens and Muses by Antonia Angress. I gave this book 3 stars, and I did enjoy it for the most part, but I had enough issues for it where like really, I can't really call it anything more than 3 stars because it wasn't. What I really like about this book is the setting and the premise. We're at this art school, it's very competitive. We are following these 2 roommates primarily, and we are also following this one professor and another kid at the school. And it talks a lot about like the art world and like political issues in the art world, and like how like the idea of making like political art can kind of go wrong in an art world that is so based around wealth and based around power. It doesn't really always connect the way it should. And I liked that part, and I liked kind of the characters. I liked the relationships between the characters. But for me, that was what I liked so much about like the first half of the book. And the second half, they kind of switch settings a little bit, and I feel like the plot for me just didn't really go anywhere interesting. I thought that it was most interesting when they were kind of in the school setting, and I thought that was going to set up a more interesting plot. And I didn't hate the plot, but just kind of where it went wasn't very interesting to me and didn't really connect with me. And I kind of wanted a little more from the plot, especially considering how much the premise interested me and how much kind of the characters I was liking in the first half. So just kind of felt a little let down as we went on, and nothing seemed to really pick up steam in any way. And also, I was not a huge fan of the ending. I get the ending makes a lot of sense for one of the characters, but I still didn't like it, and I wish that there was kind of more going on in this book. But also, it's a debut book, and for a debut author, this book was really fun to read, and I thought the characters and setting and ideas were all very good. So I'm excited to read more books from this author in the future. This just wasn't incredible, but I did have a good time actually reading it. So there's that, and I would still recommend this if like the premise sounds interesting, because maybe you'll connect more with the plot itself than I did. Okay, next is the best book I read this month, and it's a short story collection, which is very surprising for me, because usually short story collections, there'll be like some stories that I think are absolutely incredible and like some of the best fiction I've ever read, and then there'll be some that I just are completely forgettable to me and will never think about again. And this was totally different. I enjoyed every single story in here. There was not a single one that I didn't like, and that is Out There by Kate Folk, which I gave 4.5 stars. What I like so much about this book is it is about weird and unsettling stories, hence the title Out There. And sometimes things like that can get really confusing, and it can be written in a very confusing way, and I like that a lot. I do, and I feel like most of the weird short story collections I read are kind of written in a stranger way and are a little confusing to read, and that's kind of part of the draw. But with Out There, the way it's written is very straightforward, and the main weird aspects of it really just come from the ideas and the themes, which I really appreciated, because it just felt like something that was so easy to read that was still constantly impressing me with its ideas. And a lot of them really stuck out to me, and my favorites involved, there's just one kind of idea where there's these fake people on online dating apps that kind of lure women to kind of steal all their information. Very interesting, very well explored. There was also one where there's these people with like bones that like disintegrate at night, and so they're all brought to this facility. We see how their like relationships work and how they have to interact with each other, especially when there's a new person coming in. And I just thought it was really how she explores like human relationships and human ideas. Using these speculative fiction premises really worked for me, and I really enjoyed it altogether. So definitely really impressive, and I'd recommend it to basically anyone, especially if you're trying to like get into more speculative fiction. I think this is a great first step just because of how accessible it is. Next, I have my other 2-star and disappointing read of the month, and that's Labona by Adessa Moshfegh. Going into this book, wasn't really expecting a lot, just because I'd heard such mixed things about it, and the mixed things I heard made me think that I just wasn't gonna like it as much, and that's exactly what happened. So Labona, we're kind of in this medieval village of Labona. We're following the son of like a shepherd, And the thing about this town or village is that they are all miserable, and there's like a lord who apparently our main protagonist is distantly related to, who kind of lives above them. And is he really good for the town? No, big surprise. So it's basically just a story of corruption and how this kind of ruling class, but it's just the Lord and like his wife and his child, take advantage of their power and use it to enrich themselves while hurting everybody else, and kind of the implications of that. And also our main character, there's an event that happens that leads him to get closer to this family. And so we're kind of exploring it through that lens for the most part. And it's a very gross story and very unsettling story, and that's what kind of brings it down for me, because Otasu Moshfegh is really known for making these very unsettling stories, and often with kind of gross aspects, especially her first book, personally, was the other really gross one for me, McGlue. With this one, I feel like it didn't really serve the plot as much as it needed to in order to make this book good, because I feel like the premise and the overall themes are nothing special, they're nothing new. Wow, there's a corrupt lord over a village, big surprise. And it's really just written in such a not fun to read way, with so many disgusting scenes, that it kind of takes away from the story at some point. And sometimes when she writes like this, it works for me. Sometimes I feel like it really suits the story, but in this case, I didn't care enough about the characters and the story for it to be worth it to slog through all the kind of depressing and disgusting things in this book. And if you like stuff like that, more power to you. And sometimes it really works for me, but in this case, it just did not, and I'm just gonna move on and pretend I didn't read this book, because it really just didn't stick out to me, and I feel like that's the worst part. It was all this gross stuff is basically the only memorable part, and I feel like the actual story and characters were kind of boring and forgettable. But I will definitely read her other books in the future, because I think she's a very unique author. I really liked some of her other books, and it's always an experience reading her books, whether it's good or bad. It's definitely usually an experience to remember. Next book I read was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Don't really know her first name, her actual pronunciation of her first name, but this book just kind of got on a whim. I have read Gone Girl in the past, which is like her big, most popular book, but this one's obscenely popular as well. And I was just looking for something engaging and kind of a thriller, and that's exactly what I got. And so I gave this like 3 stars. It was nothing like that like completely wowed me. I feel like I could kind of guess the culprit of the murders that were happening pretty soon, and it didn't really like surprise me, but I did enjoy kind of our main character, and I did enjoy like the small town setting that we got, and the kind of unraveling of everything, how it worked. It was good. It wasn't amazing. I think Gone Girl is a lot better. And there were some parts where I was like, that's really corny. I can't believe you actually sat down and wrote that. And that kind of took me out of it at some points, but overall 3 stars. Still enjoyed reading it and was kind of exactly what I was looking for at the time, so I'm not really mad about it only being 3 stars. Last book I read this month was Good Morning Midnight by Lily Brooks Dalton, and this was a really kind of interesting way to end the month, because it's another post-apocalyptic book, but it's basically the opposite from Swan Song. Swan Song's very militaristic, it's very kind of action-heavy, where Good Morning Midnight is very low-key. There's no like fighting. We don't even know what the event is that happened, and we never find out through the book. And what makes this story is kind of the story of the people that we're following, and there's only 2 perspectives. There's one on Earth and one on space, and they're linked in a special way, and it's just about being isolated and being lonely and kind of making your way in a world where you don't know what's going on and there's lots of uncertainty, and just making that decision to kind of go on and live. And because of kind of how it's set up, there's not a lot going on. I think the space setting had like a little more going on, but both of them were kind of not really action heavy at all. And I knew that going in, so that wasn't kind of a problem for me. and I gave this 3.5 stars total. Just everything about this book is really focused on these two characters, and there's some like slow reveals throughout the book that keep it kind of engaging. And also you do form a connection to these characters. I feel like I cared more about like the people in space, because there's more than one of them, than I did about like the two people on Earth. I was a little more invested in the space story, but I liked both a lot, and it was just a really good way to kind of restore my faith in post-apocalyptic like stuff, just because this was so different from most post-apocalyptic things. And also another thing I liked about it is it was really short, which you don't see a lot, which was necessary because there's not a lot of plot. I feel like it was good to keep it short and sweet and really just focus on these characters, and then eventually just end it in a good place. And it kind of did everything I wanted it to do. It didn't blow me out of the water. It's not like an all-time favorite, but I did enjoy my reading experience, and I was pleasantly surprised with kind of how much connection I felt to the characters. That was the real positive for this book. Okay, so those are the 9 books I read this month. As you can see, like none of them were really terrible, except for the 2 that were, but it was just kind of a very like middling month. There was not a lot that really was incredible. There were a lot of books that I enjoyed somewhat, but nothing really that wowed me other than like Out There, which really was insane. But I'm not really disappointed. As I said, like life goes on. One good thing about this month is I read a lot of digital books, which I like doing because, as you may be able to tell, I've basically run out of space. And so I don't really have a lot of room for physical books. So when I can read digital books, it's really good because obviously there's no space. So what am I going to do with more physical books? But hopefully next month will go a little better. I think I'll be able to read even more next month because I have less going on and more free time. And that means more books, hopefully. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want. I try to post videos once a week. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And I will see you in the next one.